Chapter 1. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains like a quiet invitation, a reminder that every day arrives with a silent question. What will you do with the thoughts that shape your life? For many, that question floats unanswered in the background, drowned by routines, expectations, and the noise of a world that tells you what to think long before you ever learn how to think. Yet, the truth sits patiently beneath the surface. Your mindset is the architect of your growth, and mastering your thinking is the key that unlocks the blueprint of your potential. This chapter is your first step into understanding that critical thinking is not a skill reserved for philosophers or intellectual elites. It is a living, breathing tool that anyone willing to transform can grasp. And as you move through these pages, you'll feel the subtle shift, the internal stirring that whispers, "There is more to my mind than I have been using." That whisper is your first subhook, pulling you deeper into the journey of mental clarity, resilience, and purposeful growth. Most people live reactively. They interpret events based on past conditioning, fears, or learned beliefs rather than objective reasoning. They get trapped in loops of the same decisions, the same emotional reactions, and the same outcomes. But a few, those who awaken to critical thinking, break the cycle. They learn to pause, to question, to analyze, and to reframe. They learn that thoughts are not instructions, they are invitations. And you get to decide which ones you accept. As you begin this transformation, consider the first internal pivot, awareness over autopilot. You may think you're aware now, but awareness begins not with noticing your actions, but noticing the invisible thoughts that lead to them. Every assumption, every conclusion, every emotional surge is born from a thought pattern, some empowering, many inherited, and others limiting without your permission. Critical thinking empowers you to reclaim that permission. It asks you to observe your thoughts without immediately believing them. It challenges you to question the stories you've told yourself for years. And in doing so, it opens a doorway that many never walk through. Here is your next subhook. What if the majority of your limitations exist only because you've never interrogated them? That idea alone can shake your foundation, because once you realize your obstacles may be mental constructions, you can no longer ignore your own potential. You begin to see that your mind has been negotiating against your possibilities instead of negotiating for them. Imagine standing in front of a mirror that doesn't reflect your appearance, but your reasoning. What would you see? Would your beliefs hold under examination? Would your goals feel aligned with your values? Would your fears make sense when exposed to logic instead of emotion? This mirror, this reflection of your thinking, is what the journey to mastery looks like. It is not always comfortable, because growth rarely is. But it is deeply empowering. One of the most transformative realizations you'll encounter is that critical thinking is an emotional skill as much as an intellectual one. Emotional reactions often cloud judgment, distort perception, and push you into conclusions that feel true but are rooted in bias or fear. Through critical thinking, you learn to separate emotion from evaluation, not eliminating emotion, but reframing it as data rather than a command. You begin to ask, why am I feeling this? What triggered it? Is this thought helpful or harmful? Is it grounded in reality or assumption? These questions become your tools, your compass, your guiding lights. And the more you ask these questions, the more control you regain. You stop acting out of impulse and begin acting out of intention. You stop accepting surface-level explanations and begin digging for deeper truths. You stop letting circumstances determine your mindset and start letting your mindset determine your circumstances. This is the turning point in your growth, the moment you realize that your mind is not something that simply happens to you. It is something you can shape, train, and strengthen. Here comes another subhook, subtle but powerful. If you can master how you think, you can master how you live. Everything else flows from this truth. Your decisions become clearer. Your relationships improve. Your goals sharpen. Your self-belief strengthens. And perhaps most importantly, you begin to feel a sense of inner authority, an unshakable confidence that you can navigate complexity, overcome setbacks, and evaluate challenges with a level head. But mastery does not begin with perfect execution. It begins with curiosity. Curiosity is the spark that ignites transformation. It nudges you to ask questions, to explore perspectives, to challenge norms, and to seek deeper meaning. When curiosity becomes your habit, thinking becomes your instrument rather than your obstacle. You start to embrace uncertainty instead of fearing it, because uncertainty becomes an opportunity to learn rather than a threat to your comfort. As you close this first chapter, recognize the shift already happening within you. You are not merely reading, you are engaging with your own mind. You are peeling back the layers of automatic thinking and preparing to uncover the raw, powerful potential beneath. The journey ahead will challenge you, but it will also empower you in ways you may have never experienced before. This is your final subhook for Chapter 1. Once you learn to think with clarity, nothing about your life stays the same. Because clarity brings direction. Direction brings momentum. And momentum brings transformation. And this transformation is exactly what awaits you as you continue. Chapter 2. The rain had stopped just moments before Adrian stepped outside, the air still carrying the soft scent of renewal. It felt symbolic, almost like the world itself had paused, washed itself clean, and offered a fresh beginning. That was the nature of growth. Every breakthrough required a clearing, a moment where something old washed away to make space for what needed to rise. But unlike the weather, the mind doesn't refresh on its own. It waits for you to decide that you are ready. This chapter opens with a truth many avoid. Your mindset is not shaped by the world, but by the way you interpret the world. Two people can face the same difficulty and walk away with opposite outcomes. One sees defeat, the other sees direction. One stops, the other starts again. The difference is never the event, it is the lens through which it is processed. Right now, you are beginning the process of adjusting that lens, refining your perception so you can see opportunities where you once saw obstacles. As Adrian walked down the street, he realized that most people never pause to evaluate their thinking patterns. They move like passengers inside their own minds, letting assumptions and emotions drive the vehicle of their lives. Rarely do they step into the driver's seat. Rarely do they question the route. Rarely do they ask if the destination even aligns with who they truly want to become. This is why many feel stuck, not because they lack ability, but because they lack intentional thinking. Here comes your first subhook. What if the life you want is not out of reach? What if your mindset simply hasn't caught up to your potential yet? This question can be unsettling, because it shifts responsibility back to you. But it also shifts power back to you. When you understand that the quality of your thoughts shapes the quality of your progress, you no longer wait for circumstances to change. You change the way you approach them. You realize that challenges are not roadblocks. They are invitations to grow in resilience, clarity, and strategy. One of the foundational pillars of critical thinking is reflective evaluation. Reflection is not rumination, it is examination. It is the conscious act of understanding not just what you think, but why you think it. Without reflection, your thoughts move unchecked. Biases deepen. Assumptions harden. Fear becomes familiar. But with reflection, your thoughts become visible, movable, moldable. You begin to shape them instead of being shaped by them. As Adrian reached a quiet park bench, he thought back to a moment years earlier, a moment he had dismissed as unimportant. Someone had once told him, "Your life changes the moment you question the thoughts you used to obey." Back then, he didn't understand it. But now, sitting beneath the slowly brightening sky, the meaning felt unmistakably clear. Growth begins the moment you stop accepting every thought as truth. Subhook 2 rises here. If a thought cannot survive your questioning, should it have power over your growth? This is where transformation deepens. You begin to identify mental shortcuts, those quick interpretations the brain makes to save time and energy. While useful, they are also dangerous. They can lead you to believe you're not capable, not ready, not worthy. They can convince you that past failures predict future outcomes. They can push you into repeating the same choices that hold you back. But when you shine the light of critical thinking on these shortcuts, the illusions collapse. Adrian watched as a small bird hopped along the wet pavement, unbothered by the storm that had just passed. It moved freely, unconcerned about what had happened an hour earlier. Humans, however, often cling to old storms long after they've ended. We replay moments, rehearse fears, and relive failures as if they define the next chapter. But thinking critically allows you to separate memory from identity. The past becomes information, not instruction. This leads to the next subhook. Your past is a reference point, not a rulebook. Why let outdated thoughts guide a future they were never meant to shape? Critical thinking is not about being skeptical of everything. It is about seeking clarity. It is about asking deeper questions such as, what evidence supports this belief? Is this conclusion based on logic or emotion? Am I reacting to reality or anticipating a fear? When these questions become habitual, your decisions become sharper. Your growth becomes intentional. Your direction becomes self-crafted instead of externally imposed. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment and listened to the quiet rustle of leaves. In that silence, he realized something profound. Most breakthroughs happen internally long before they appear externally. You don't suddenly become wiser, stronger, or more capable. You think your way into those states. You challenge your limiting beliefs. You replace assumptions with understanding. You choose responses that reflect growth instead of protection. And that brings us to the chapter's final subhook, a question that begins to reshape everything. If your mind is the foundation of your reality, what becomes possible when that foundation becomes unshakable? As you step forward into the next chapter of this audiobook, remember this. Transformation is not about forcing yourself to think positively. It is about learning to think accurately, intentionally, and courageously. Critical thinking does not eliminate difficulty, but it gives you the power to navigate it with clarity and strength. And as that power grows, so will you. Chapter 3. The library was nearly empty when Maya stepped inside, the scent of aging paper drifting through the quiet hall like a gentle reminder that knowledge never rushes, it waits. She had come here seeking answers, but more than that, she had come seeking clarity. There was something about the silence of a library that made thoughts rise to the surface, slowly, deliberately, like truths you can no longer ignore. And today, Maya felt ready to confront the thoughts she had spent years avoiding. Critical thinking often begins in places like this, not in chaos, but in calm. When distractions fade, the mind reveals its patterns, and those patterns reveal your direction. Maya settled into a wooden chair near the window, where the soft sunlight pooled across the table like a warm invitation to reflect. She opened her notebook, the blank page staring back at her with a question she had written the night before. What assumptions have I accepted without questioning? That first question became your first subhook of this chapter. How many thoughts govern your life simply because you've never challenged them? Maya tapped her pen against the page, realizing the weight of her own question. It was easy to mistake assumptions for truth, especially when those assumptions came from childhood, society, or past failures. People tell you what's realistic, what's possible, what you should or shouldn't attempt. Over time, those voices blend with your inner voice until you can't distinguish between guidance and limitation. This is the silent trap of unexamined beliefs. You follow them without ever noticing you're following. But Maya was learning, slowly, courageously, that mindset transformation requires confronting these inherited limits. She took a deep breath and wrote down her first assumption: I am not capable enough to achieve big things. The moment she wrote the words, she felt a shift inside her. Seeing the belief on paper made it feel smaller, almost fragile. And that's the power of observation. Thoughts lose their dominance when you drag them into the light. Subhook 2 rises here. If your most limiting beliefs were exposed, would they withstand evidence, or fall apart under clarity? Maya began examining the belief. Had she failed at everything she attempted?
No.
Had she succeeded many times but dismissed those successes as luck?
Yes.
And suddenly, she saw the flaw. Her conclusion wasn't based on truth, but on selective memory. She remembered setbacks vividly but minimized her achievements. It wasn't her capability that was lacking, it was her evaluation of herself. This realization sits at the core of critical thinking. You must evaluate evidence, not emotion. Emotions are real, but they are not always accurate. They shift with moods, environments, and insecurities. Evidence, however, brings objectivity. As Maya reflected, she wrote another question beneath her belief: what proof do I actually have? The list that followed surprised her: projects she completed, goals she reached, challenges she overcame. The belief that once felt like an unbreakable wall now had cracks all over it. That leads to subhook 3. What other impossible beliefs in your life would crumble if you examined them with the same honesty? Maya continued her reflection, flipping through earlier pages in her notebook. She saw old entries filled with worry, doubt, and emotional reasoning. She wasn't ashamed. She understood now that growth is not about eliminating fear, but learning to think beyond it. Critical thinking doesn't demand perfection. It asks for perspective. It invites you to understand where your thoughts come from and whether they serve your progress or hinder it. She wrote a new sentence at the top of the next page: my thoughts influence my direction, but I get to choose which ones I follow. It felt empowering, like reclaiming a part of herself she had unknowingly given away. The library's quiet atmosphere amplified her clarity. The stillness around her matched the stillness she was cultivating within, where thoughts could be examined without panic, and conclusions could be reshaped with purpose. In the distance, an elderly man browsed through shelves with slow, deliberate steps. Maya watched him for a moment, wondering what wisdom his years had gathered. She imagined him living through countless circumstances, perhaps learning the same lessons she was learning now, that thinking is a lifelong skill, one that evolves with experience. And that became another insight: wisdom is not age, wisdom is reflection. Subhook 4 emerges: if you pause to reflect more often, how much faster would your growth accelerate? Reflection turned into realization, and realization turned into inner strength. Maya began listing the assumptions she wanted to challenge, ones about her abilities, her future, her worth, and her potential. Each belief became a doorway, some leading to courage, others revealing fears she had hidden from for years. But now, instead of avoiding those fears, she examined them with intention. She asked the kinds of questions that strip fear of power. Is this fear based on fact or imagination? What perspective am I missing? What would someone with confidence conclude instead? And with every answer, her clarity sharpened. Critical thinking is not about having all the answers. It is about asking better questions. It teaches you how to navigate uncertainty, how to reshape your mindset, and how to build a foundation of reasoning that supports your goals instead of sabotaging them. As Maya closed her notebook, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: alignment. Not certainty, not perfection, but alignment. Her thoughts were no longer running wild. They were being guided. She stood from the table, feeling lighter, more focused, and more grounded. The library had done its job. Or maybe she had done the work herself, and the library simply provided the silence to hear her own growth happening. As she stepped toward the exit, sunlight washed over her once more. It felt like a promise, a reminder that clarity is not a destination but a practice. And with each moment of honest reflection, she was becoming someone stronger, someone more intentional, someone capable of shaping her life with thoughtful precision. Your final subhook for this chapter arrives here. If your mind can change your life, what will happen now that you've learned how to change your mind? The transformation continues in the next chapter, deeper, sharper, and more empowering than before. Chapter 4. The city was alive with its usual rhythm, cars weaving through traffic, voices blending into a steady hum, and the distant echo of construction beating like a mechanical heartbeat. Yet, amid all this noise, Jordan found himself standing still at the corner of a busy intersection, observing rather than rushing. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't in a hurry to get somewhere. Instead, he was in a hurry to understand something. Why do people make decisions that contradict the life they say they want? This question had been tugging at him for weeks. He saw it in his friends who spoke about their dreams but didn't take steps toward them. He saw it in colleagues who complained about circumstances yet repeated the same choices every day. And he saw it within himself, the hesitation, the doubt, the quiet resistance to meaningful change. That realization became the spark that pulled him deeper into the study of critical thinking. Your first subhook emerges here. What if the biggest barriers in your life are not external challenges, but internal contradictions you've never confronted? Jordan crossed the street slowly, navigating around hurried pedestrians who seemed to move on autopilot. Their faces reflected the same routine, focused, distracted, exhausted. He wondered how many of them had paused long enough to question the direction of their lives, or whether they simply followed habits formed years ago. It struck him how powerful habits truly were, silent forces that shaped daily actions without needing permission. Critical thinking, he realized, was the antidote to unconscious living. It forces you to become aware of your mental autopilot. It challenges you to ask why you choose what you choose, believe what you believe, and avoid what you avoid. Jordan felt the weight of that responsibility. It meant he could no longer blame circumstances for outcomes created by his own unexamined patterns. He found a quiet cafe and slipped into a corner seat, the aroma of fresh coffee cutting through the noise in his mind. He opened his journal and wrote a question that he knew would shape the rest of his journey. What choices am I making based on habit instead of purpose? As he wrote, patterns unfolded in front of him, decisions that felt comfortable but unproductive, actions driven more by fear of failure than by desire for growth. He saw how often he convinced himself that certain opportunities were not the right time, when the truth was that he simply didn't want to risk discomfort. His avoidance wasn't logic. It was self-preservation pretending to be reasoning. Subhook 2 takes shape here. How many times have you mislabeled fear as logic? Jordan tapped his pen against the page, suddenly aware of how many decisions in his life had been guided not by clarity, but by invisible biases. Some came from past experiences. Others came from societal expectations. And some came from overlooking the difference between desire and discipline. He wanted growth, but did he choose growth? Wanting and choosing, he realized, are not the same. He leaned back in his chair, absorbing the insight. Critical thinking requires intellectual honesty. Not the honesty you show others, but the honesty you show yourself when no one is watching. It is the courage to admit when your excuses sound intelligent but are emotionally driven. It is the willingness to recognize when comfort has disguised itself as wisdom. Jordan turned another page in his journal and wrote the sentence slowly, letting each word sink in. Growth requires choosing discomfort before it becomes necessary. This truth formed the foundation of his next realization. Reactive thinking is what happens when life forces you to adapt. Proactive thinking is what happens when you choose to evolve before you're pushed. Many people wait until stress, failure, or crisis forces them to change. But those who master their minds grow ahead of schedule. They anticipate challenges instead of fearing them. They prepare instead of procrastinating. They choose courage before circumstances demand it. Subhook 3 emerges like a whisper you can't ignore. What would your life look like if you stopped waiting for pressure to push you into action? Jordan watched as a young woman sat at the table beside him, hurriedly flipping through documents. She looked stressed, overwhelmed, almost breathless. He wondered how many decisions she had postponed until they piled up. Stress, he realized, often came from delayed choices, those moments when thinking is avoided instead of applied. People push decisions aside hoping clarity will come later, but clarity doesn't arrive by avoidance. It arrives by engagement. As he finished his coffee, Jordan walked back onto the street with a new awareness. He began observing not just the world but the thinking patterns that came with it. He noticed how often people justified their choices without examining them. He saw how quickly assumptions turned into beliefs, and how beliefs turned into limitations. Most importantly, he recognized how deeply emotional reasoning influenced everyday life. Critical thinking doesn't erase emotion, it reframes it. Emotion becomes information, not instruction. Fear becomes a signal, not a stop sign. Doubt becomes an indicator, not a verdict. Jordan felt lighter realizing that emotions didn't have to rule over him, they could guide him if viewed through a balanced lens. Subhook 4 surfaces here. What if your emotions were never the problem, only the way you interpreted them? Jordan paused at the edge of a quiet park, noticing how the sunlight danced across the grass. For a moment, he simply breathed. There was something freeing about recognizing that his mind could evolve, that he could rewrite thought patterns that once felt permanent. He understood that critical thinking wasn't just about analyzing information, it was about analyzing himself. His biases, his fears, his habits, his motivations. He realized then that self-awareness is the birthplace of intelligent action. Without it, decisions become guesses. With it, decisions become strategies. As the afternoon breeze brushed past him, Jordan wrote one final question before closing his journal. If I want a different outcome, what thinking pattern must I change first? The answer wasn't simple, but the direction was clear. Real transformation begins internally, and the mind, once disciplined, becomes the most powerful tool in shaping the future. Your final subhook for this chapter settles here. If every step forward begins with a thought, how powerful could you become by mastering the thoughts that take those steps? The journey continues in Chapter 5, stronger, deeper, and even more transformative. Chapter 5. The morning fog lingered over the hillside trail as Leora made her way upward, each step steady, deliberate, filled with a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She had chosen this hike for a reason. Something about climbing a steep path mirrored the inner journey she was navigating: uncertainty at the base, clarity at the peak, and challenging terrain in between. And today, she was ready to confront the one mental habit she had avoided for too long: the stories she told herself. Everyone creates stories in their mind, about who they are, what they're capable of, and what their future will look like. These stories become internal scripts, shaping actions, reactions, and expectations. Leora had spent years repeating a script that didn't belong to her, one written by old experiences and unchallenged fears. Now, with the crisp morning air brushing against her skin, she felt ready to rewrite it. Your first subhook emerges here. If the story you live by isn't one you chose, then who's really guiding your life? As she reached a bend in the trail, Leora paused to catch her breath. Below her, the valley stretched in rolling waves of green, calm and unbothered by the world's chaos. She thought about how much time she had spent fighting thoughts that weren't even true, thoughts inherited from doubt, fear, or past criticism. She remembered moments when she held herself back because an inner voice whispered, "You're not ready." But was that voice ever grounded in evidence? Or was it simply an echo of insecurity? Critical thinking demanded that she separate narrative from fact. Many people never do this. They simply accept stories formed during moments of weakness and let them define years of their lives. But Leora knew that real transformation required courage, and courage begins with questioning the scripts that seem permanent. As she continued climbing, she noticed how her breathing synced with her pace, slow, steady, grounded. It reminded her of a truth she had recently learned: your mindset is strengthened the same way your muscles are, small, consistent effort. One decision at a time. One question at a time. One rewritten story at a time. Subhook 2 rises here. What if the limits you believe in only exist because you've repeated them long enough to sound convincing? Leora reached a small clearing and sat on a smooth rock, letting the morning wind brush against her face. She opened her journal and wrote, "What story am I currently telling myself that no longer serves me?" 3 answers came almost instantly. "I need more experience before I can start." "I'm not good at making bold decisions." "Others are more capable than I am." She stared at the words, realizing how false they looked outside her mind. These beliefs had shaped her choices for years, yet seeing them written made them feel hollow, almost flimsy. And something powerful clicked inside her. Stories gain strength only when left unexamined. Once questioned, they lose their authority. The essence of critical thinking is this: your thoughts are not facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations can evolve. Subhook 3 surfaces. If your thoughts were held to the same standard as evidence, how many of them would hold up? Leora turned to the next page and wrote a different question, one that demanded both honesty and courage. What story do I want to live instead? Instead of hesitation, she wrote, I am capable of growing into challenges. I make thoughtful, confident decisions. I have equal potential to those I admire. These new stories didn't feel like delusions. They felt like possibilities waiting for commitment. Critical thinking wasn't about blindly replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It was about replacing inaccurate thoughts with accurate ones. It was about choosing truth over fear. As she resumed her climb, she felt lighter, almost as if she had left old mental baggage on that rock behind her. The forest thickened around the trail, filling the air with the scent of pine and damp earth. Each step brought with it a growing awareness. Thinking patterns shape emotional patterns, and emotional patterns shape actions. Change your thinking, and your entire experience shifts. But Leora knew the transformation wouldn't be automatic. She had to train her mind the way athletes train discipline: repetition, awareness, adjustment. Every time an old script resurfaced, she needed to pause and ask, is this thought based on truth or on habit? Subhook 4 appears. If you challenged every limiting story for 30 days, how different would your life look on day 31? Near the peak, the sky opened wide, and sunlight spilled over the hillside. Leora stood still, taking in the breathtaking view. The valley below seemed smaller now, distant, almost symbolic of how her limiting beliefs felt, less intimidating once she rose above them. She realized that perspective wasn't just physical, it was mental. When you elevate your thinking, your problems shrink in proportion. Transformation, she understood, wasn't about eliminating difficulty. It was about elevating your perspective so difficulty no longer dictates your direction. And that's where critical thinking becomes life-changing. It helps you rise above the emotional fog that once distorted your clarity. Leora sat on a warm patch of rock near the summit and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts settled. And in that stillness, she whispered a sentence she wanted to carry into the next chapter of her life. My story is mine to rewrite. This wasn't just affirmation, it was a declaration. No more living under narratives carved by fear. No more shrinking to fit outdated beliefs. No more letting old versions of herself speak louder than who she was becoming. Your final subhook for this chapter settles in your mind gently but powerfully. If you became the editor of your own story today, how extraordinary could the next chapter of your life become? The journey continues in Chapter 6, deeper, sharper, and even more transformative. Chapter 5. The morning fog lingered over the hillside trail as Leora made her way upward, each step steady, deliberate, filled with a quiet determination she hadn't felt in years. She had chosen this hike for a reason. Something about climbing a steep path mirrored the inner journey she was navigating: uncertainty at the base, clarity at the peak, and challenging terrain in between. And today, she was ready to confront the one mental habit she had avoided for too long: the stories she told herself. Everyone creates stories in their mind, about who they are, what they're capable of, and what their future will look like. These stories become internal scripts, shaping actions, reactions, and expectations. Leora had spent years repeating a script that didn't belong to her, one written by old experiences and unchallenged fears. Now, with the crisp morning air brushing against her skin, she felt ready to rewrite it. Your first subhook emerges here. If the story you live by isn't one you chose, then who's really guiding your life? As she reached a bend in the trail, Leora paused to catch her breath. Below her, the valley stretched in rolling waves of green, calm and unbothered by the world's chaos. She thought about how much time she had spent fighting thoughts that weren't even true, thoughts inherited from doubt, fear, or past criticism. She remembered moments when she held herself back because an inner voice whispered, "You're not ready." But was that voice ever grounded in evidence? Or was it simply an echo of insecurity? Critical thinking demanded that she separate narrative from fact. Many people never do this. They simply accept stories formed during moments of weakness and let them define years of their lives. But Leora knew that real transformation required courage, and courage begins with questioning the scripts that seem permanent. As she continued climbing, she noticed how her breathing synced with her pace, slow, steady, grounded. It reminded her of a truth she had recently learned. Your mindset is strengthened the same way your muscles are, small, consistent effort. One decision at a time. One question at a time. One rewritten story at a time. Subhook 2 rises here. What if the limits you believe in only exist because you've repeated them long enough to sound convincing? Leora reached a small clearing and sat on a smooth rock, letting the morning wind brush against her face. She opened her journal and wrote, "What story am I currently telling myself that no longer serves me?" 3 answers came almost instantly. I need more experience before I can start. I'm not good at making bold decisions. Others are more capable than I am. She stared at the words, realizing how false they looked outside her mind. These beliefs had shaped her choices for years, yet seeing them written made them feel hollow, almost flimsy. And something powerful clicked inside her. Stories gain strength only when left unexamined. Once questioned, they lose their authority. The essence of critical thinking is this: your thoughts are not facts. They are interpretations. And interpretations can evolve. Subhook 3 surfaces. If your thoughts were held to the same standard as evidence, how many of them would hold up? Leora turned to the next page and wrote a different question, one that demanded both honesty and courage. What story do I want to live instead? Instead of hesitation, she wrote, I am capable of growing into challenges. I make thoughtful, confident decisions. I have equal potential to those I admire. These new stories didn't feel like delusions. They felt like possibilities waiting for commitment. Critical thinking wasn't about blindly replacing negative thoughts with positive ones. It was about replacing inaccurate thoughts with accurate ones. It was about choosing truth over fear. As she resumed her climb, she felt lighter, almost as if she had left old mental baggage on that rock behind her. The forest thickened around the trail, filling the air with a scent of pine and damp earth. Each step brought with it a growing awareness. Thinking patterns shape emotional patterns, and emotional patterns shape actions. Change your thinking, and your entire experience shifts. But Leora knew the transformation wouldn't be automatic. She had to train her mind the way athletes train discipline: repetition, awareness, adjustment. Every time an old script resurfaced, she needed to pause and ask, is this thought based on truth or on habit? Subhook 4 appears. If you challenged every limiting story for 30 days, how different would your life look on day 31? Near the peak, the sky opened wide, and sunlight spilled over the hillside. Leora stood still, taking in the breathtaking view. The valley below seemed smaller now, distant, almost symbolic of how her limiting beliefs felt, less intimidating once she rose above them. She realized that perspective wasn't just physical, it was mental. When you elevate your thinking, your problems shrink in proportion. Transformation, she understood, wasn't about eliminating difficulty. It was about elevating your perspective so difficulty no longer dictates your direction. And that's where critical thinking becomes life-changing. It helps you rise above the emotional fog that once distorted your clarity. Leora sat on a warm patch of rock near the summit and closed her eyes. Her breathing slowed. Her thoughts settled. And in that stillness, she whispered a sentence she wanted to carry into the next chapter of her life. My story is mine to rewrite. This wasn't just affirmation, it was a declaration. No more living under narratives carved by fear. No more shrinking to fit outdated beliefs. No more letting old versions of herself speak louder than who she was becoming. Your final subhook for this chapter settles in your mind gently but powerfully. If you became the editor of your own story today, how extraordinary could the next chapter of your life become? The journey continues in Chapter 6, deeper, sharper, and even more transformative. Chapter 6. The train hummed steadily along the tracks as Evan stared out the window, watching the blur of landscapes shift from crowded suburbs to open fields. The rhythmic motion of the carriage felt strangely calming, as though each passing mile peeled away a layer of noise from his mind. He was traveling to spend a weekend alone. No work, no obligations, no voices but his own. And for the first time, he realized how unfamiliar that silence felt. Evan had always prided himself on being busy. Movement made him feel productive, even if the movement had no direction. But lately, the momentum of his life felt more like drifting than progressing. A quiet truth had begun to surface. Being busy is not the same as being intentional. And now, sitting on this train with nothing to distract him, the truth felt impossible to ignore. Your first subhook emerges. When was the last time you slowed down long enough to ask if your actions actually align with your goals? As the train continued forward, Evan pulled out a notebook. It wasn't new. He had carried it for months but barely used it. Every time he thought about journaling, something else seemed more urgent. But urgency, he realized, often hides what's actually important. Today, he finally opened it. He wrote his first question. What am I chasing, and is it truly what I want? He waited for an answer, but none came quickly. It struck him how strange it felt to question his direction. He had followed the same routine for years. Wake early, work hard, push through everything, collapse at night, repeat. He thought this meant progress, but now he wasn't so sure. His choices felt automatic, not intentional. Familiar, not fulfilling. Critical thinking doesn't only challenge beliefs, it challenges direction. It asks you to examine the path you're walking instead of assuming it leads somewhere meaningful. Evan realized he had been measuring his life by speed rather than accuracy. The second subhook forms here. What if the life you're busy building isn't the life you truly want? The train slowed as it entered a quieter region, fields stretching endlessly on both sides. Evan felt the tension in his shoulders soften. There was something liberating about recognizing he could change his direction. People often fear re-evaluating their lives because they believe change invalidates their past. But critical thinking teaches the opposite. Growth honors your past by using it wisely. As he flipped to a new page, Evan began listing the things he spent most of his time on: work deadlines, social expectations, commitments he didn't care about, goals he inherited but never questioned. Then, in the next column, he wrote what he actually valued: creativity, meaningful connections, inner peace, personal growth. The two lists didn't match. This discrepancy felt like a revelation. He realized he had been living by default, not design. He wasn't directing his life, he was reacting to it. And reactions rarely lead to fulfillment. They lead to cycles that repeat until questioned. Subhook 3 rises here. If your daily routines don't reflect your values, how long until you feel disconnected from yourself? Evan set the notebook aside and leaned back, watching sunlight flicker through the window. A group of travelers chatted nearby, their conversation light and energetic. He wondered how many of them were living with clarity and how many were drifting like he had been. He didn't feel alone in the question. More people drift than admit. Clarity doesn't arrive in a moment of inspiration. It arrives in a moment of honesty. That honesty can be uncomfortable, but discomfort is the birthplace of transformation. Critical thinking doesn't just expose flaws, it reveals possibilities. Evan returned to his notebook and wrote a new question. What would my life look like if I made decisions deliberately instead of automatically? He imagined a version of himself who paused before commitments, who evaluated opportunities instead of accepting them out of habit, who chose goals aligned with his inner world rather than external pressure. This vision felt empowering, not overwhelming. Critical thinking, he understood, wasn't about questioning everything endlessly. It was about asking the right questions, the ones that shape direction, deepen clarity, and reveal meaning. As the train neared his destination, a serene town surrounded by rolling hills, Evan felt a growing sense of internal alignment. He had never given himself permission to slow down, but now he felt the importance of it. Slowing down wasn't weakness, it was awareness. Subhook 4 appears. If you never pause to reflect, how can you ensure your next step is the right one? Stepping off the train, Evan felt the shift immediately. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and fresh earth. The absence of city noise created a quiet that felt almost sacred. As he walked toward the small cottage he had rented, he noticed how his thoughts felt clearer when his environment wasn't pulling his attention in 1,000 directions. He dropped his bag inside, walked back out, and settled on a wooden bench overlooking a vast meadow. There, surrounded by stillness, he asked himself the question that defined the moment. Who am I when I am not being who the world expects me to be? The answer didn't come quickly, and that was okay. Critical thinking isn't about fast answers, it's about true ones. Evan knew he would spend the weekend exploring that question, allowing clarity to unfold naturally instead of forcing it. As the sun dipped low behind the hills, painting the sky in warm streaks of gold, Evan wrote one final sentence in his notebook before closing it. My direction is my responsibility. This realization felt both grounding and freeing. He didn't need perfect clarity to begin. He needed awareness, intention, and courage. And now he had all three. Your final subhook for this chapter settles deeply within your awareness. If you became intentional with every choice you make, how dramatically would your life begin to shift? The journey continues in Chapter 7, deeper, sharper, and increasingly transformative. Chapter 7. Elias woke before dawn again, but this time there was no heaviness on his chest, no fog clouding his decisions. Instead, there was a curious electricity humming through him, the kind that appears when the mind finally realizes it has more power than it ever allowed itself to use. Last night he had stayed awake replaying every lesson he had uncovered so far, each one forming a clearer picture of how deeply thinking patterns shape a person's life. But today's realization felt different, bolder, sharper, almost dangerous in a good way. If thinking had helped him rise this far, what could disciplined thinking make him become? The question itself became a subhook in his thoughts, pulling him forward as he stepped into the morning air. The town was still quiet, but inside him something loud was awakening. He headed toward the small hill behind his house where the first rays of light always touched the earth. It had always been his silent place, the one spot where he could hear his thoughts without the world's noise. But this morning, he wasn't searching for quiet. He was searching for direction, something deeper than a goal, bigger than a dream. He wanted purpose, the kind that sticks even when life begins to test your patience. Halfway up the hill, he heard a voice behind him. "You walk like someone preparing for a battle," Mira said, stepping beside him with a calm grin. She always showed up when the story inside his head needed another push. Elias smiled. "Maybe I am," he answered. "But I think the battle is mostly against myself." Mira nodded. "Then you're fighting the toughest opponent you'll ever face." Her words struck him harder than he expected. For years he believed obstacles were external: lack of support, lack of opportunity, lack of clarity. But the more he grew, the more he realized that the loudest resistance lived internally. It came from doubt, fear, lack of discipline, and the limits people silently accept as who they are. They reached the top of the hill and watched as the horizon slowly caught fire. Mira sat on a smooth rock, looking at Elias the way a mentor looks at someone on the verge of a breakthrough. "Let me ask you something," she began gently. "When you face a challenge, what is the first thing you tell yourself?" Elias hesitated. "Honestly, I usually think about what could go wrong, how it might fail, how I might disappoint people or embarrass myself." Mira raised an eyebrow. "And do those thoughts help you? Do they push you forward? Or do they make the wall taller?" Elias didn't need to answer. The truth was obvious. Critical thinking, Mira continued, is not only about analyzing the world. It's about analyzing the stories you tell yourself. If your internal narrative is weak, fearful, or negative, your decisions will follow that same direction. The words left Elias silent. He had mastered examining situations, choices, and behaviors. But he had never turned that same sharp lens inward. He had evaluated everything except the quiet voice that shaped his confidence. "So how do I change that voice?" he asked. Mira smiled. "By mastering your inner narrative. And that begins with reframing." The walk back down the hill felt like a lesson in motion. Mira explained how reframing wasn't just optimism, it was strategic thinking. Instead of reacting to thoughts, one must redirect them. She gave Elias a simple structure, one that worked like a mental compass. 1. Identify the dominant thought. 2. Question its accuracy. 3. Replace it with a perspective that empowers action. "Every time you face a challenge," Mira said, "your mind gives you a first draft of reality. But that draft is not final. You have the power to rewrite it." A powerful subhook formed instantly in Elias's mind. If I rewrite my thoughts, I rewrite my outcomes. The realization felt like someone had handed him the missing piece of a puzzle he didn't know he was building. And as soon as he grasped it, he remembered countless moments where reframing could have saved him from hesitation. He remembered avoiding opportunities because he believed he wasn't ready. He remembered downplaying his success because he thought it was luck. He remembered staying silent when he should have spoken, holding back when he should have taken a step forward. He wasn't being held back by reality. He was being held back by interpretation. Back in town, Elias walked with a new posture, the kind built from inward strength rather than outward confidence. But as he walked, he noticed something he hadn't before. The market worker opening his stall, the young student sweeping the pathway, the elderly woman carrying water. Each one was engaged in the same inner conversation he had just started to master. Their struggles were different, but the mental patterns were familiar. "Why do you look so thoughtful?" Mira asked. "I just realized," Elias said slowly, "every person is fighting their own internal stories." "And that," Mira replied, "is why mastering yours becomes a responsibility. When your mind is strong, your presence becomes fuel for others." The idea sent another spark through him. Critical thinking wasn't only for self-improvement. It could uplift people around him. It could create ripples in conversations, inspire others quietly, and even break cycles of doubt that had existed in his community for years. Elias realized then that his growth was not meant to be hidden. It was meant to be shared. That afternoon, he returned to his room and opened his notebook, not to reflect on the past, but to rewrite his future. He wrote down the thoughts that had limited him for years, then questioned them one by one, replacing each one with a stronger narrative. "I'm not ready," became. "I can learn what I need." "What if I fail?" became. "Failure is data, not defeat." "I don't belong here," became. "I belong wherever I am willing to grow." Each reframed thought reshaped the story of his identity. And for the first time, Elias felt his mindset strengthening like a muscle finally being trained correctly. A final subhook echoed through him. Your mind is your environment. If you want to grow, you must cultivate it daily. He closed his notebook slowly, knowing that this chapter of his journey had changed something permanent. His future challenges would still come, but now he had a framework, one that would guard his confidence, sharpen his judgment, and transform his perspective. Mastery was no longer an idea. It had become a practice. And Elias was ready for the next step. Chapter 8. The next morning arrived with the sharp clarity of a new beginning. Elias woke before the sun again, but something felt different this time, lighter, steadier, more grounded. His mind, once filled with tangled doubts and scattered focus, now moved with newfound structure. For the first time in years, he wasn't simply reacting to his thoughts. He was directing them. Still, he knew that growth never paused. Mastering his internal narrative was a breakthrough, but far from the final step. If he wanted lasting transformation, real, unquestionable personal evolution, he needed to learn how to apply critical thinking in the most unpredictable place, the real world. As he stepped outside, he saw Mira waiting, leaning casually against the old lamppost that cast its glow over the path at night. "Ready for today's lesson?" she asked, her tone playful but her eyes focused. Elias nodded. "More than ever." "Good," she said. "Because today, we talk about decision-making, the heart of real transformation." They walked toward the center of town where people were already moving about, each person carrying tasks, worries, and hopes. Elias noticed how often people's choices seemed rushed, emotional, or patterned by habit. A vendor arguing over coins, a teenager hesitating at a store entrance, a man pacing with a frustrated expression, all moments of decision influenced not by clarity, but by reaction. "Look around," Mira said softly. "Every one of them is making decisions right now. And many of those decisions will shape their day, their confidence, and sometimes their future. But most of them don't realize that better thinking leads to better choices." Elias listened carefully. A powerful subhook took shape inside him. If I learn to think with precision, I can decide with power. Mira led him toward a quieter part of the street where they could observe without being noticed. "Critical thinking applied to decisions," she explained, "isn't about doubting everything. It's about creating a process that keeps your emotions balanced, your mind open, and your perspective grounded in truth, not assumption." Elias felt the weight of her words settle into him. He had spent years letting emotion dominate decision-making, frustration pushing him to walk away, fear convincing him he wasn't ready, impatience making him rush. It wasn't weakness, it was simply untrained thinking. "How do I build that process?" he asked. Mira raised a finger. "First, you must slow down. Every rushed decision is a borrowed mistake." A silence settled between them as he absorbed the meaning. People often believed they needed to decide instantly, but urgency was frequently an illusion created by anxiety, pressure, or expectation. "Second," she continued, "you must separate facts from interpretations. Many decisions collapse because they are based on assumptions rather than what is actually true." Elias nodded. It reminded him of the dozens of moments he misread situations simply because he hadn't looked deeper. "And third," Mira added, "you must consider long-term consequences before short-term comfort. Easy choices often lead to hard lives, while wise choices lead to growth." The simplicity of the framework almost startled him. Yet its power was undeniable. They continued walking until they reached the edge of the small river that cut through the town. The water shimmered with morning light, gentle ripples catching reflections of passing clouds. Elias stood at the bank, feeling his mind stretch into a new level of clarity. "Let's try something," Mira said. "Think of a decision you've been avoiding." Elias didn't need time to recall it. There was one decision that had been quietly pressing on him for weeks: whether or not to apply for the mentorship program in the city, a competitive opportunity that scared him almost as much as it excited him. "I've been thinking of joining the city mentorship program," he admitted quietly. "But I don't know if I'm ready." "There it is," Mira said with a smile. "Now let's apply the process." Elias inhaled deeply, grounding himself. Step 1. Slow down. He took a moment to breathe and calm his racing thoughts. The decision no longer felt like a threat, just an option he was calmly examining. Step 2. Separate facts from interpretations. Fact: he qualified. Fact: he had been improving rapidly. Fact: it was a real opportunity. Interpretation: I'm not ready. Interpretation: others are better than me. Interpretation: I might fail. Those were not facts, they were echoes of the old narrative. Step 3. Evaluate long-term consequences. If he applied and didn't get selected, he would still gain experience. If he never applied, he would stay where he was, wondering what if for years. The answer became so clear he almost laughed. "I think I should apply," Elias said finally. Myra's smile widened. "Not because you feel confident, but because you made a clear decision based on truth rather than fear." He nodded. And for the first time, making a big decision felt freeing rather than intimidating. As they made their way back to town, Elias noticed a small crowd forming in the square. A heated discussion had broken out between two neighbors over a misunderstanding about land boundaries. Voices rose, tempers flared, and the argument thickened with emotion. Without thinking, Elias stepped forward, not to mediate, but to observe. Mira watched him silently. This moment became another subhook. Real mastery is tested in motion, not isolation. He began applying the same process to the situation. The facts were different from the interpretations. The conflict wasn't about land, it was about pride, fear of loss, and unchecked assumptions. Elias realized he didn't need to interfere. What he needed was to understand how often people made decisions from emotion rather than clarity. And in that realization, a new layer of his growth unfolded. Decision-making wasn't just personal. It shaped communities, relationships, and opportunities. If he mastered it, he could influence not only his own life but also the energy around him. Later that evening, Elias sat at his desk, writing again. But this time, he wasn't rewriting old beliefs. He was outlining decisions he had been afraid of, each one examined through the framework. The more he wrote, the more empowered he felt. He understood now that a transformed mindset wasn't measured by confidence alone, but by the choices that confidence produced. A final subhook echoed inside him as he closed his notebook. Your life shifts the moment your decisions become intentional. Elias leaned back in his chair, a quiet certainty settling over him. He was building the kind of mind that didn't fear decisions, but shaped them with clarity, purpose, and discipline. He knew now that true mastery was within reach. And tomorrow, he would step even further into it. Chapter 9. The following days unfolded with a new intensity, as though the world had decided to match the energy rising within Elias. Every experience, every conversation, every small moment felt sharper, more meaningful. It was as if he had unlocked a hidden layer of reality that he had never noticed before. His mind had become more than a tool, it had become a compass. Still, Mira had one more concept to introduce, one that would test everything he had learned: self-discipline through strategic thinking. Elias woke early again, but instead of heading toward the hill or the town square, he found Mira waiting near the old library, a place he rarely visited, yet always admired for its quiet presence. She greeted him with a nod and motioned for him to follow her inside. Dusty sunlight filtered through tall windows, illuminating rows of shelves filled with knowledge. Mira walked between them with purpose, stopping suddenly in front of a table. On it lay a single worn-out book with no title. "What's this?" Elias asked. "Your next lesson," she answered. "But the book isn't the lesson. The discipline required to understand it is." Elias raised an eyebrow. "Explain." Mira sat down, her expression calm but firm. "Critical thinking is powerful. Clarity, decisions, reframing, they're all essential. But without discipline, even the sharpest mind becomes dull. Discipline turns knowledge into growth, decisions into action, and intentions into results." Elias felt the familiar spark, another subhook forming. A strong mind means nothing without strong habits. Mira opened the untitled book. Its pages were filled with short moral dilemmas, logical puzzles, and scenarios requiring reasoning rather than answers. Some were simple. Others were layered so deeply that they demanded patience and thoughtful analysis. "I want you to study these," she said. "Not to solve them quickly, but to train yourself to stay with a challenge long enough to understand it." Elias nodded, though the task seemed overwhelming. He had always been intelligent, but patience was a skill he rarely practiced. He often rushed, assuming speed meant strength. But Myra's instruction revealed a new truth. Discipline is the oxygen of mastery. He sat down and began with the first scenario. It seemed easy enough, a situation about choosing between two paths, both leading to different outcomes. But as he read it again, he realized there were hidden assumptions, emotional biases, and invisible influences embedded in the wording. He reread it a third time, then a fourth. Only after deep focus did the actual meaning reveal itself. "Good," Mira said quietly. "Now you're thinking beyond the surface." Elias looked at her, suddenly energized. "This requires more effort than I expected." "Exactly," she replied. "Growth always does." He spent hours in the library, exploring puzzle after puzzle. Some frustrated him. Others revealed insights that stayed with him long after he closed the pages. But what changed him most was not the content. It was the discipline he was developing in the process. By midday, Elias stepped outside to clear his mind. The fresh air felt sharper, almost cleansing. As he walked through town, he noticed something new: habits, patterns, repetition. A man sweeping the same spot again and again out of routine, even though the wind kept blowing leaves elsewhere. A student scribbling notes without reading them. A shopkeeper rearranging products in the same way every morning. These habits weren't negative, but they weren't intentional either. A realization settled over him. People live on autopilot without questioning their patterns. Critical thinking wasn't only about decisions or reflections. It extended into habits, routines, and daily behaviors. And if habits were unexamined, even the brightest mind would stagnate. He returned to the library with renewed determination. Mira noticed the shift in his posture. "You've realized something." Elias nodded. "Habits shape identity. And without discipline, they control you instead of helping you grow." A slow smile spread across her face. "Now you're ready for the real lesson." She stood, motioning for him to follow. They walked to a quiet courtyard behind the library, the walls covered with climbing vines, the ground softened by fallen leaves. Mira stopped in the center. "Elias," she said, "today you learn the discipline of consistency." He listened intently. "You've learned the power of reframing. You've learned the process of making decisions. But consistency is what transforms these skills into who you become. Without consistency, even powerful steps become scattered footprints." Mira handed him a small notebook. "This will be your discipline journal." "What should I write?" Elias asked. "Every day," Mira said, "you will document 3 things. A thought you examined. A decision you made intentionally. A habit you reinforced or replaced. No excuses. No skipping. No waiting for motivation." Elias held the notebook gently, as though it was a key. Consistency is not about doing everything perfectly, Mira added. It's about refusing to abandon your growth. A deep subhook sparked inside him. Discipline isn't punishment, it's alignment. Suddenly, he understood why so many people struggled to grow. They weren't lacking ability, they were lacking consistency. They wanted results without repetition, transformation without practice. He once lived that way too. But not anymore. That evening, Elias returned home with a sharper sense of purpose. He placed the notebook on his desk, opened to the first blank page, and wrote with slow, intentional strokes. Thought examined. I believed I couldn't stay focused for long. But today proved I can. Decision made intentionally. I chose discipline over ease by studying the puzzles without rushing. Habit reinforced or replaced. I replaced avoidance with deep focus. I reinforced commitment. He closed the notebook, feeling something solid ground inside him, like planting a stake in the soil of his future. From the window, he saw lights glowing across the town, each one representing someone living a story shaped by habits they may not even notice. But Elias was no longer that person. He was building intention, brick by brick, through the discipline of daily reflection. Myra's voice echoed in his mind. Discipline is the bridge between who you are and who you can become. Elias leaned back in his chair, feeling steady, capable, and clear. He knew that tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and new puzzles. But he also knew he had the discipline to meet them head-on. The path to mastery was no longer a mystery, it was a practice. And he was finally ready to live it with purpose. Chapter 10. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling golden light across the horizon, when Elias found himself standing at the edge of the cliff, overlooking the valley he had come to know so well. The wind carried a quiet power, brushing against his face like a reminder of everything he had learned, and everything he had yet to master. For a long time, he had thought the journey would end when he gained clarity or mastered a technique. But now he understood, transformation was not a destination, it was a continuous ascent. The valley below was alive with motion, farmers tending their fields, children running along dirt paths, merchants opening shops. Life went on as always, relentless and unpredictable. Yet Elias stood apart from it, not because he was above it, but because he had learned how to move within it intentionally. He had discovered that the world doesn't change for you, but the way you respond to it can reshape everything. Your first subhook surfaces. What if mastery is less about changing the world and more about changing yourself? He reached into his backpack and pulled out the notebooks he had filled over the past weeks, the records of thoughts examined, decisions made intentionally, habits reinforced, and puzzles unraveled. Each page was a testament to the effort it had taken to think clearly, to question assumptions, and to apply principles consistently. He remembered the hesitation he had felt at first, the uncertainty, the fear that he was not ready or capable. Now, those doubts felt small, almost laughable, like shadows that vanish when exposed to light. Elias turned to a fresh page and wrote a single question at the top: what does ultimate personal growth look like? Immediately, he thought of everything he had experienced. Growth was not just knowledge or skill, it was the integration of clarity, intention, discipline, and courage. It was the ability to pause before reacting, to examine every assumption, to replace fear with strategic thought, and to turn insight into action. It was the capacity to make decisions that honor both reality and aspiration, and to persist even when challenges tested resolve. Subhook 2 arrives. If every choice, thought, and habit were aligned with your highest potential, what life could you create? Elias closed his eyes and remembered Myra's lessons, the emphasis on reflection, reframing, and daily practice. He realized that transformation is not glamorous, it is deliberate. It is about the quiet moments of self-examination, the disciplined acts repeated when no one is watching, the courage to confront discomfort and fear. These were the invisible victories that compound over time, building a life grounded in purpose rather than chance. He opened his eyes and looked over the valley again. A gust of wind lifted the pages of his notebook, and for a moment he felt the connection between his inner and outer world. The mental clarity he had cultivated wasn't just for him. It had the power to influence others, subtly or profoundly, through example and presence. Subhook 3 resonates. How many people could be inspired by the strength you build within yourself? Elias thought about the obstacles he had faced: hesitation, fear of failure, self-doubt, external pressure, and the endless distractions that had once ruled his mind. Each challenge had been a mirror, reflecting areas where thinking needed discipline, where choices required courage, and where habits demanded reshaping. But each reflection also became an opportunity, an invitation to evolve. He realized that growth isn't about avoiding hardship, it is about navigating it intelligently and intentionally. He sat down at the cliff's edge, letting his legs dangle over the steep drop. He considered his life, not as a collection of moments, but as a tapestry woven from thought, choice, and action. Every thread mattered. Every decision, no matter how small, left an imprint on the future. And every moment of clarity created space for the next one, building momentum that could carry him further than he ever imagined. Subhook 4 appears. If every decision you made reflected your highest understanding, how unstoppable would your life become? Elias took out his pen and began one final reflection. He wrote a short list of principles that would guide him beyond this journey. 1. Examine your thoughts constantly. 2. Make decisions intentionally, not reactively. 3. Reframe fear into actionable insight. 4. Build habits that reinforce growth, not comfort. 5. Align every action with long-term purpose. 6. Commit to consistency, even when motivation fades. As he wrote, a sense of profound calm settled over him. He realized that critical thinking, when applied deeply, doesn't just improve intelligence, it transforms identity. It redefines what is possible, not by changing the world outside, but by changing the mind that interacts with it. Elias closed the notebook and held it against his chest, feeling the quiet strength it represented. He had become someone who could navigate uncertainty with confidence, examine assumptions without fear, and respond to challenges with clarity. He had become a master not of circumstance, but of mindset. A soft smile crossed his face. For years, he had chased personal growth as though it were an abstract concept. Now he understood that growth was a living practice, an ongoing dialogue between thought, action, and reflection. And the most powerful lesson of all was this: mastery is not a final point to reach, but a journey to live, moment by moment, with awareness and purpose. The final subhook resonates. If transformation is a practice, not a destination, what would happen if you committed fully to it today? The sun had risen fully now, casting a warm glow over the valley below. Elias stood and looked forward, feeling the infinite potential of a life guided by intention. Each step, each thought, each decision from this moment onward would matter. And for the first time, he felt not just ready for the future, but capable of shaping it. He began walking down the cliff path, not in haste, but with deliberate purpose. Every movement echoed the lessons he had learned. Every breath reminded him that personal growth is a lifelong practice. And every moment carried the possibility of transformation, waiting for those bold enough to claim it. Elias was ready. The journey of mastery had no end, but it was finally his to live.